Okay, thank you. Hello everybody, and sorry a few minutes late, some technical difficulties. So just to introduce myself, my name's Brad Billington. My background is from table tennis as a performer for the national team, all through the different age groups, from junior right through to the sort of the men's team, and then took about 4 or 5 years into coaching the national team before moving into education, where I set up a table tennis academy, and then went in and kind of moved away from sport, but now I kind of coach at grassroots level, and I was kind of quite interested in the day in terms of being able to maybe contribute some aspects of my experiences and what I've learned over the years, and what, if I was a new coach starting again, I maybe focus on a little bit more. So really, I guess the main thing I'm sort of going to talk about today links to the kind of psychological aspects of the performance, but in terms of how we can kind of prepare performers and athletes from grassroots, really, in terms of the cultures that enable high performance. So I've kind of seen some various different models, different kind of aspects that affect performance, and I've also seen performers struggle with a transition once they get to performance level, in terms of then having to adjust and adapt their behaviors to be able to perform well in different kind of circumstances. So I've reflected, I've done a lot of research, read a lot of books, and kind of tried to look at some of the key things. So really, I'm going to talk a little bit about strategies of high performance at all levels, exploring the rationale of what I use is this is how we, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. And that's something that I've kind of developed and evolved over the years, so that performers know how they are expected to behave in certain situations, which we discuss and we explore and we prepare for in training, and to look at what I clearly focus on, what I believe really matters. And again, this is just from my experience, where I've kind of seen others do it well, seen others do it not so well, made mistakes myself, but also seen some rewards from what I've implemented as well. So really, when I started to try and unpick what performance actually is, and there's obviously plethora of research out there, and I really wanted to simplify what it actually meant. So what I use in my preparations and my coaching, and what I started to evolve early on in my coaching career was performance was two things, really. It was the capability, was obviously how well somebody could perform, the potential they had, but also the behavior. And that was basically, how did they go about doing what they did well, or what they were going to do better. And I started to kind of really sort of analyze my coaching and think, I kind of, certainly in the beginning, spent a lot of time focusing on the capability. And that evolved into the technical, the tactical, sort of the game intelligence, the psychological preparations, physiological. And actually, when I've started to look around a lot of other coaching, I kind of see the same all the way through, that, you know, which is clearly important, and I'm absolutely not saying it's not important, but there's a hell of a lot of emphasis on these elements. And I started to try to kind of look at high performing teams, squads, individual sports where there's a squad element to the training, and to look at, well, what does make the difference in those, and how can performers transition through their continuum, not only looking at these elements, but how do we get these performers to kind of reach a higher level, on a better understanding. So I'm just lost my slide there. So all are essential, but my experience was, out of those kind of 4 or 5, was the psychological element was the one that had the biggest impact. So because that drove the kind of the desire to train hard, to perform, to compete, to deal with situations, to prepare. So I started to kind of unpick my practice and look at other coaches' practice and think, well, what am I doing in my coaching environments at all levels to enable those performers the best chance to perform well, and what am I doing and what can I create to enable them to perform well, or to be motivated, or to want to go to the next level, or to achieve, or just to keep turning up to training and keep coming. So I spent a lot of time looking at the environments that we as coaches create, and trying to look at where is there a disconnect between what we're trying to do and what we're telling the performers to do, but what we're actually putting into practice. So I kind of started to do a lot of research at grassroots levels, looking at different sports, different coaches, start to do a fair bit of analysis of what is it coaches are doing in sessions that is having an impact, that is kind of inhibiting performance. And one of the things that I kind of have come to the conclusion of from my experience is that behavior is very seldom dealt with at any level in terms of the culture. There's codes of conduct, there's rules, there's certain aspects that coaches kind of implement, but they only tend to be reinforced when somebody's not doing it. So if they turn up late, or if they start misbehaving or whatever in training, this is kind of a reinforcement that that's not what we do. But I've not seen much about this is what it looks like done well. This is what we should be doing. This is how we do it. So I've kind of, as I kind of develop my coaching practice, I start to think about what was my starting point as a coach. What do I look for first? Do I go straight in and start thinking, right, I'm just going to try and make them better and help them get better, whatever element I kind of set up or the coach sets up? Or do I focus a lot on getting the behaviors right and the culture right, or is it a bit of both? So it was kind of like just trying to look at where coaches started from at every level in the continuum, whether it be at foundation level, participation, performance, excellence, whatever pyramid people kind of use. So like I said, I focused solely in the beginning on getting them better, and then started to add in the behaviors as we went along. And I kind of felt that was looking back, it was a slower way of doing it, and didn't spend enough time looking at what the expectations of what the training hall looked like, what the way we did things looked like, in order to help them prepare mentally. So I've seen a lot of coaches where the training doesn't necessarily match the performance. So in training, they do one thing, they're behaving a certain way, they kind of do that, and then when they get to the match, the game, or whatever it is, the performance, there's a pressure put on them, there's an expectation, this is how we do it in games, and there's some rules put in place. So trying to look at the transition between that really, and what is it we kind of look at. And I kept going back to the capability versus behavior, or capability and behavior, or which one am I going to focus on first? So I switched my thinking very quickly into these performers, these players, whatever level they're at, they're coming to the training zone, the practice room, whatever it is, there needs to be some kind of expectation of behavior, and that needs to match what you're trying to get out of them at that particular level in the continuum. So if it's to keep them coming back, it's got to be certain elements within that session that's going to enable them to want to come back, to be motivated to come back, but also to want to improve in terms of their performance. So one thing I developed in my practice was rather than kind of telling them off for certain behaviors that we were kind of noticing, like, don't do that, to show them what it is we want. So I very quickly switched a lot of my practice and training around talking to them about certain elements. And obviously, as time went on, these kind of evolved, and there's an extensive list of various different levels and performance that you might want to talk to the performers about. But we spoke at length about, when we perform, this is how we want to perform. And that might be down to, I want you to take risks, I want you to enjoy it, I want you to just play free, or whatever it might be. There was an expectation. And then we practice that. We would go in and go, right, this is what it looks like now, rather than just hope, fingers crossed, that it happens when we perform. We spoke very much about how we train physically, and we moved away very quickly from what I see regularly of punishment fitness, of right, extra laps, extra performance, when extra press ups, extra sit-ups for certain behaviors. Well, that's kind of negative, really reinforcing the benefit of training. So if you do something wrong, you're going to get fitter. It's kind of like, well, I might get things wrong so I can get fitter. So thinking about all the behaviors that we adopt as coaches, how we behave under pressure, what does that look like? How do we want to behave as a team or as an individual? Talk about body language, talk about how we communicate, talk about all those elements, and then put some pressure situations in training. If we're at an elite level, there's pressure at under 7 level in any sport, but it's a different pressure. It might be pressure from parents. So how do we deal with the noise and the shouting and the expectations of parents? We set up expectations about this is how we as a team talk to each other. We talk with kindness, we talk with empathy, respect, we listen. When we're traveling to games, whatever level, this is how we travel. So I went through a whole list of this is how we, and put a lot of ownership on them. And actually, it wasn't just something that ended up on the wall that we kind of, visibly kind of show performers every now and again. It was something that we built into the conversation, the training, the routine. And if we saw over celebrations or if we saw over confidence, whatever it might be, we might talk about how do we deal with success? How do we as performers deal with expectation? How do we deal with adversity? And what does that look like? We'd show videos, etc. So spent a lot of time talking about this is how we, and that had a big impact in terms of the way that we went about it. So whatever the level, what my experience is telling me is that try to identify from your perspective as a coach and your experience, what behaviors will bring about the best performance and the best, kind of improvement in that particular environment, and what is it you're striving for. So if it's just participation, if it's just about getting them coming back, what do we want that to look like? Because what we start to get when we don't identify that is some performers that are there to win and improve, and some are there to participate. So when we start getting the bridge between the levels, how do we distinguish one from the other, and what does that organization look like, or that training session look like? So for me, and I think this is something that I've seen taken out of the kind of development as we go through the continuing performance, is for me, fun and collaboration is key for me. So for me in my performance, whatever level that I'm coaching at, whatever level I'm involved at, that is one of the behaviors that I want to see. I want to see the performers enjoying what they're doing, and I want to see them working together. So that's my starting point. Whatever level I'm coaching at, what can I bring to the session that enables them to work together, that enables them to enjoy and have fun? Then you might have expectations at the foundation level about how they're expected to behave in terms of results. So at the very beginning, when they're losing or when they're not even getting involved, how do we manage that? What is our kind of mantra? This is how we perform. This is how we try to play. Taking the emphasis away from this is how we win. The long-term goal potentially in performance is that we're getting them used to that, but what more importantly, we're getting them to adhere to some expectations of behavior, and looking at the longer-term culture, so that if they've come through different environments, they can easily transition into expectations. So you see this at elite level, where some performers, particularly in the high-profile sports, find it difficult to transition between certain cultures and expectations because of the different kind of expectations on behaviors around culture, and maybe their process to get to there has not had that kind of process in it. It's been purely about capability. So their talent's got them in the door, but then their behavior kind of keeps them in the door, if you like, and in the group. So my suggestion, and again, this is not telling anybody anything new, it's about how do we implement the key behaviors and the key elements of it. So live and breathe the behaviors. Don't just do them at the start of the year, a code of conduct, a list of behaviors, and then revisit them next year and go, oh, well, we didn't do that. They didn't turn up in the kit. They didn't, they wore what they wanted, etc. And then also trying to look at the performance, about when we're kind of looking at the performance, try to focus on the behaviors that went along with it. So rather than talk about, well, we lost 2-0 or we didn't perform well because, try and feed back to them on how the performance looked in terms of behaviours. Remember that as you move through the performance levels, it's not a prison camp. And again, I think we've had, at elite level, when somebody comes in with a real kind of iron rod, and when the performer's not used to it, the fun goes out of it in their perception. Think about, how do I get the best out of the performance, and what do I want that environment to look like? My communication, my feedback, and ultimately reflect on your own performance. Is it my coaching and my environment that's hindering or helping their performance at any level? So why are they not turning up, or why are loads coming? Why are we winning? Why are we performing well? Why are we doing the behaviors? Equally, why are we not? And what am I doing, rather than just telling them what they shouldn't or should be doing? And then what I see in reality is pretty much what I've said, is that often as you get higher up, then behaviors start getting introduced to performers. But actually, it might be, on my view, is it might be too much of a culture shock. So maybe we start implementing certain things from an earlier perspective. And all of this is to try to create the mindset that, how do we prepare our performers to perform well in whatever it is that they're doing? Because I often hear coaches talk about, oh, my performers are strong or weak, but I don't see much evidence of the coaching in terms of the psychological elements, certainly at grassroots, about how we respond to certain situations and certain aspects of dealing with adversity, focusing, concentration, getting in the zone. So I guess my key takeaway really is look at your environment, look at what you've created, look at how you can improve it, develop it, and how you might embed some of the behaviors that you want to enable the performers to flourish. Because, coaches have a massive impact on the behavior of the performers, and also the psychological elements of how they approach the performance. And that's, I think, my time up. I can't see anyone in the corner, so whether I'm gone over time, so apologies if I have, but I will stop sharing.
Thank you very much, Brad. That was a really, really fascinating talk to get sort of a deep dive into your coaching approach to creating culture and behaviors and things like that. Do we have any questions from the floor for Brad? So we've had a question just here from Stuart saying, how do you ensure a behavioural approach does not become a tick box exercise and focuses on emotion, well-being and mindsets, etc.?
Yeah, and I think from a teaching point of view, I've seen that really evident in teaching more, where we kind of a tick box of a code of conduct, expectations of behaviour, but then we never really visit it. The teacher forgets what those behaviors are. So my perspective is, like I said, is always the fun element is always in there. So if I'm seeing that the performers are not having fun, we talk about how we can have fun in training. Why are they coming to training? What their purpose for coming is, rather than what I want them to do. So I think trying to ask them the question about what they want from sessions, to tap into the well-being element. Because I fully agree, if you've got a massive list of things, that list I showed you, by the way, about this is how that's not for every single group. That there might be 2 or 3 that for a certain group that I'm working with, because if you overcomplicate it and it becomes, like you say, a massive list, then they'll just forget what they are. So if you've got 3 things, just nail those 3, focus on those 3 things, talk about those 3 things, and build on that as time goes on. So well-being is absolutely the key for me in terms of that. So limit those to as few as possible.
Excellent, thank you. Any more questions from the floor?
I have one, if that's okay.
Mark, of course.
Cheers for that, Brad. It's great.
No problem.
Just a quick one. I know that you mentioned about kind of around kind of the negative reinforcement, but what, like, I suppose it's probably a bit more of a question on your own coaching practice, but how do you manage those that maybe disagree with maybe some of the things that you kind of set out or plan, and maybe how do you manage maybe pushback?
So again, I think it varies at the levels, but most of the time it is taking the time for the conversation and the talking to. I've seen, so over long periods certainly in one of the table tennis I was involved with, the punishment of physical training for not meeting the criteria often had a very negative effect when it did come to the fitness training. It was a very, oh, we've got fitness now, rather than the fitness is going to help us improve and perform, because it had been used as a punishment, I guess. So when people weren't on the bus with that, it was talking to them about and showing them examples of people that behaved in those ways. So we would reinforce where somebody was kind, or where somebody was talking to somebody with respect. We would highlight, have you seen how they've spoken to them, and see the impact now on the team, that the teammates are not getting upset when their teammate is kind of moaning at them or shouting them or whatever it might be. So I suppose it was taking a lot of time, and I found at grassroots level that more challenging, because you're with them less. You're with them for an hour and a half for a session, and they sort of go off for the whatever it might be. When you're with the squad for a long period of time, it was much easier. So I've seen the challenges of it when you're with a squad all the time, and how the niggles of those behaviours might start to rub off on each other. And again, meetings, talking, using the psychologist and or the coach, myself, to unpick what it is we're trying to achieve and why it's important. Because you'll always get people that don't see that way and will go against that. But sometimes it's thinking about, well, what's for the greater good here? What are we trying to achieve? If it's a team sport, what are we trying to achieve? But we don't want to just disregard somebody because they don't agree with it. So the conversation, I would say, was key for me.
Cheers, Brad. Thank you.
Excellent. We maybe got time for one more question, if anybody has one. So I've got a question, Brad, if nobody else wants to take that one. So I was just wondering what role athlete leaders or parents or other support individuals in support roles or other coaches played in helping create this culture and reinforce these behaviours, if any.
Yeah, no, I mean, working with the parents is critical, because obviously they're with the players a lot, or the performers, or even just the participants a lot longer than what we are. So there was a lot of time at elite level talking to parents about their role, their language that they use, the conversations that they would have with them. And again, all coaches kind of do this, but it would be simplifying it into 2 or 3 key behaviours that we want to see from the players. So where if we've got an approach where we are, when I was working with under 14 players, for example, we were looking at quite a high risk strategies of performance, about taking risks. So what we were encouraging the parents to do is, when they were talking to the kind of players outside of our earshot, will be to encourage that approach, rather than, well, just keep the ball on, whatever, play safe, just do what, because that's not what we were trying to get to. So having those conversations, grassroots level, I find it certainly in the team sports really kind of quite damaging. The language that's used from the sidelines, from the parents, it's direct instructions all the time, and we're trying to develop a creative kind of learn by your mistakes, work together and solve it, and we'll discuss it afterwards, and we get 700 direct instructions from the touchline, which is kind of complete opposite to what we're trying to kind of do as a squad. So yeah, again, lots of conversations, lots of reinforcement communication with parents to try to explain what we're trying to achieve here. And ultimately we want, if in sport, we want them to keep coming back, and where we can get them to improve. So yeah, be clear on what you're trying to do with the players and with the parents and other coaches as well, which also can be challenging.
Excellent. Thank you very much. That was a really fascinating talk, and definitely interesting to hear you expand upon some of those ideas as well in the Q&A. So we've got 45 minutes now until the sports psychologist talk. So we've got this lunch period, we can go away, get yourself something to eat, get yourself a brew, have a bit of a stretch of the legs, and then we'll come back for 1:15. The rooms are going to be set up exactly the same for the sports psychologist talk. So if you're interested in the sports psychologist talks in this room, feel free to just stay in this room, and vice versa. You can hop between the other breakout rooms depending on which talk you're interested in. Also, one thing to note is, over this lunchtime period, we are going to keep these rooms open, and that's just to facilitate any networking and things like that. So if there was any interested any talks, sorry, you're interested in, feel free to hop into the rooms that they may be in. You can see that just by clicking on the breakout button and seeing who's in those rooms. So do feel free to jump into there and see if they're about, and you can ask more questions and get contact details and things like that as well. But other than that, I'll see you all at 1:15. Hope you have a nice little lunch break, and I'll see you in a bit.